Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for coming here this afternoon. We've got candidates who come along to answer your questions. All of the main parties were invited to be here. UKIP was included, but they're not here at all yet. We think that they're not going to start their campaign until next week. That's the reason we've been given. But thank you all for coming. I hope we're going to have a good afternoon. Before we begin, I'd just like to start by saying that this week has been a very tragic week. It's been a terrible time for health professionals and educational professionals across the north with the terrible tragedy in Manchester. So I'd like to invite you just to mark that by standing, if you're able, just for a moment of quiet reflection. Thank you, everyone. Also, all our friends, families who've suffered in that tragedy. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and just spend a couple of minutes saying why they're here, and then we'll get on to the questions. I've got some that were submitted prior to the meeting, and I'll call on those people to ask their questions first. And we'll have the first half hour devoted to health and education questions, and then open it up to other questions that people want to ask. So I'm going to start over here with Eric Broadbent first.
Thank you very much, Anne. I think most of you know me, but for those who don't, my name is Eric Broadbent. I'm a local guy. I attended local schools, Northstead School, then went on to Friarage. Afterwards, I worked for many years at Blackstone's, the coach builders, where I got involved with the unions, representing people, and that gave me my thirst for politics, local politics. I won a seat on the Scarborough Borough Council in 1991, which I still hold. In 2000, I took early retirement from Blackstone's. I also gained a seat in that year for the North Yorkshire County Council for the Northstead Division, and I won my seat back last week, or is it 2 weeks now? Time's going that fast. As I say, I love local politics. I love meeting local people. I like getting involved in the problems. It's my sort of duty as a councillor to see what's going on. Also in 2004, 2005, I was the mayor of the borough of Scarborough. So I feel that that really gives me the experience with my union background and my sort of council work to represent the people of Scarborough and Whitby in Parliament. It's been, I would say, a hidden dream of mine for many years, and I'm honoured to have been selected on behalf of the Labour Party to fight for local people, Scarborough and Whitby, and address their problems. And in the canvassing in the last few weeks, we've had a great team, but their problems that the local people certainly are letting me know what's going on and the hardships they're facing. So I just relish going out to Parliament and along with Jeremy Corbyn, and let's put Scarborough and Whitby on the map and let's sort the problems out.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is David Malone. I'm the candidate for the Green Party. I live locally in Falsgrave, where I've lived since 2003. My kids go to school here. My eldest is going to York University. My day job for the last 20 odd years has been making science documentaries, mainly for BBC. Which means my background is as a scientist. Since 2007, I've written about finance. I wrote a book about the financial crisis, and I write one of the country's fairly influential financial bonds, and that's what I do with the Green Party. I'm one of those who thinks about finance in the city and the international law that surrounds it. And the reason that I'm standing is because I personally feel that left and right is no longer what's going to define the politics of our age. I'm not saying left and right isn't important, I just don't think it's enough. For this reason, that the forces which are raged against this country and the people of this country do not work. They do not answer to Mrs. May. Mrs. May answers to them. So if you defeat Mrs. May, you've had a victory over the monkey, but you haven't even talked to the organ grinder. If you want to solve the problems which beset this country, the offshoring of jobs, the non-paying of taxes, I could go on, then you have to know what those international forces are, how they work, and how to defeat them. And you will not defeat them with the ideology and the tools of the last century. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Robert Graham Lockwood. That's Robert officially, Graham to my friends. It's my parental problem, I'm afraid I've got all my life. So it's Graham to my friends. I trust they are all friendly today. I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate for Scarborough and Whitby. I have many, many complaints about the economic policy being pursued by Westminster. I think Westminster as a system is basically obsolete. This is not the 19th century. This is the 21st century. We have two major political parties who are forever looking backwards. The era of the oil and gas industry is very much now a part of history. We have to look forward. Renewable energy is the future. David and I have had many conversations about this. We have a major threat here in North Yorkshire, which is the fracking. Potentially, this will damage all of our health. This is my one big worry. And unfortunately, the government party in power at the moment are massively in favour of fracking. I have been campaigning against fracking for more than 5 years. I am happy that Eric, who I've met many times, particularly this year, was good enough to take a DVD from me and watched it and was convinced that fracking has to be opposed at all costs. I suspect that Eric's input in the Labour Party has finally persuaded the Labour Party that they too are opposed to fracking. We have many, many complaints in North Yorkshire. We have been overlooked by the two London parties for too many years. Can anybody please, over the course of this afternoon, please tell me where is there a major infrastructure expenditure in Yorkshire? Where is it? I'm sorry. I hope to learn. I apologise for going too long.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. First and foremost, I'm actually a farmer. My family have farmed just outside Malton since 1850 when we moved on to a farm on the Castle Howard estate. And I hadn't really thought about a career in politics until there was a by-election in Rydale actually, and that really got me interested in it. I represented Scarborough as part of the Yorkshire region in the European Parliament from 1999 to 2004, becoming deputy leader of the Conservative group in the European Parliament and the coordinator for the Conservative group in the Environment Committee, which considered a lot of important environmental legislation that affects us now. In 2005 I was elected by the people of Scarborough and Whitby, taking the seat from the Labour Party, and it's been my honour and privilege to represent Scarborough and Whitby in Parliament since that time. When David Cameron came to power, he appointed me to the Government Whip's office, and then subsequently as a Transport Minister, and following on from that, I've been the Immigration Minister in the Home Office, which is a real challenge given the Brexit negotiations coming up ahead. I believe Theresa May and the Conservatives are the only people that can be trusted to move forward in these challenging times, to keep the economy on track through the difficult Brexit negotiations, to secure a good deal in terms of trade, a good deal in terms of immigration, and a good deal for Britain in terms of access to the European market. I believe that Theresa May has got what it takes to make that deal, and indeed, if anyone knows Theresa May as well as I've done for many years, she will not be pushed around by the large vested interests, will not be pushed around by anyone, certainly not pushed around by the leaders of the other European member states.
Thank you very much.
My name is Bill Black, and I represent the Yorkshire Party. One of the things that became apparent to me some years ago is that the Westminster government isn't terribly interested in what happens in Yorkshire. Everybody's talking about infrastructure. What people don't seem to realise is that the whole of infrastructure spending, from the Humber to the Tweed up to Berwick, is less than the Crossrail project in London. That funding for schools, the capitation per pupil, is 50% what it is in the South East. That for every pound the government spends on people in the South East, they spend 80 pence in Yorkshire, and they spend £1.25 in Scotland. There's something very wrong with the system, and we feel that Yorkshire should be able to set its own path, and should have a form of devolution which would give us a single Yorkshire Assembly and give us the right to spend our money on our education and our health service and our roads, rather than spending great wads of money of ours in London to keep institutions running, and we're not getting any support. As regards fracking, which has come up here, fracking in a county where 70% of the people get their drinking water from aquifers is obviously patently absurd.
Thank you very much, Bill. Just to introduce myself, my name is Anne Swift. Up until a year ago, I was a teacher at Glastonbury Primary School, and until Easter, I was also the national president for the National Union of Teachers. So obviously, my interest lies in education. And just to be clear, I am not a candidate, so don't ask me any different. So I'm going to open the floor to you now. First of all, I've got some questions that were placed on the website. If I could ask Chris Book, I think, could you ask your questions in here? Thank you.
I can remember it, sorry.
Apologies
if this is inelegantly phrased, and I don't mean any kind of offence by it, but as you started at the top of the meeting, you talked about the tragic events of Manchester, and I think everybody agreed with Theresa May when she came on TV and thanked all the health and emergency services, in particular doctors, nurses, paramedics, police, and all the rescue services. And I guess my question is, with that in mind, and how much high regard we hold our emergency services and our health workers, is the government still committed to the approach to pay, which effectively is reducing the pay of these valuable members of staff who are either getting pay freezes or below inflation pay rises?
Thank you, Chris. Eric, would you like to take that first, and I'll go?
Yes, extremely important question to pay. Obviously, for the last 7 years, you mentioned pay being frozen, pay being capped. I've talked to many staff and workers in the NHS that compared their wage slips to 2010 to 2017. They're virtually the same. So you're quite right. Pay has really been frozen. When the Labour Party gets into power, in a few weeks, they will cut the cap on public services, on the NHS, the 1% cap. They will hand over the pay negotiations until the independent remuneration panel. So that will be negotiated at local levels, at national levels, rather than having these freezers, which is spoiling all their standard of living has gone down, the children, the workers, and of course this has a knock-on effect with the job they do. Morale is low, and so it's very, very important that we once again get these pay negotiations back in the political arena.
We are always told that we can't afford to pay better salaries to public workers because we have to have austerity. And that is in fact a lie. This country is in debt. But before the financial crisis, our debt to GDP was 42%, which was historically low. And it had only been moving up by 1% a year for the previous 7 years. In other words, there was no large public debt. PricewaterhouseCoopers said very clearly, government debt, as a part of our total debt, was historically low. Then we decided to bail out the banks, and both of the major parties did it, and we spent £1.4 trillion. And between 2008 and 2013, our debt to GDP went from 42%, which was what we had when we were paying decent wages, to 84%. And the fact of the matter is, the top 10% of this country own 56% of all the wealth in this country. And the bottom 50%, which I take as most of us, we own 11.7%. And yet we're the people that the Tories would like to tax. So when you're told that we have to have austerity, that is just an outright lie. We can afford it. It's simply a matter of whose mates you want to line the pockets of.
I'm happy to say that national Liberal Democrat policy is to put 1% on income tax to raise £6 billion a year for the National Health Service, £1 billion of which would be ring-fenced for mental health care. It seems fairly obvious to all of us, I think, that we have to pay for our health and social care system. You mentioned wages specifically, so I will just come back and answer the question directly. I am absolutely convinced that every single working person in this country hasn't had a pay rise for the last 9 years. I certainly haven't. There is an increasing squeeze on people, shall we say, at the lower end of the pay scale. I am not a wealthy person. You're quite right, David. And of course, there's something going very wrong with the capitalist system. This is really the root of the problem. Unharnessed capitalism is an extremely dangerous animal. It will corrupt itself into oblivion. I didn't do a self-awareness very well. I wasn't going to, but I've studied history. I have a degree in history for what it's worth. And I've studied political foresight. I could boy about that privately or a private somewhere perhaps. However, the point I'm trying to make is the lessons of history are there. Unharnessed capitalism eats itself and collapses. Corruption takes hold. And before you know what's happened, we have a system that's on its face. This is really what we're discussing here. How do we fund public services? A 1% tax on income tax across the board will raise £6 billion. The Institute of Fiscal Studies has done a report this week and has accused the Labour Party and the Conservative Party of misleading people. And you don't have to take my word for this. Misleading, in my Yorkshire dictionary, is a euphemism for lying. And I am happy to say that the Liberal Democrat tax policies came out by far the best. Utilitarianism is something we could be teaching at secondary schools. I know it's a dreadful word and dumb. It's the greatest benefit for the greatest number. It's taken the Labour Party a long time to rephrase it, but obviously couldn't use that phrase because it's a liberal philosophical statement. That is what we are discussing. Prosperity and peace for the vast majority
finances in this country we're in. Yesterday is absolutely right. The government of the day, the Gordon Brown government, had put their hands in our pockets to bail out the banks. Lloyds Bank, they've got their money back, or most of it as it is, but we still have big exposure to that. But in addition to that, let's not forget that that government, the Labour government, as so many Labour governments in the past, have spent more money than they've raised in taxation. And that's led to a crisis in the public finances. We have unsustainable levels of public debt, with unsustainable deficit, and we've cut that deficit by 2/3, and now the international markets understand that we now have sustainable public finances. Now that meant taking some tough decisions. It meant cutting some areas of expenditure. But I'm proud to say that when George Osborne announced the austerity, as it's been termed, he made sure that the health service and overseas aid were exempted from those cuts. In 2000, you say absolute rubbish, and perhaps dangerous.
Tax the rich.
In 2010, we were spending 100 billion on the health service. In 2015, we were spending 113 billion on the national health service. That is not a cut for the health service. But it did mean, of course, we had to make some tough decisions in terms of pay, and many those working in the public sector had to accept that. And indeed, many in the private sector had to accept that as well, because there were very tough times. I'm pleased to say that our economy is now on an even keel, and indeed, Mrs May has said that we will temper our savings so that we become imbalanced by the middle of the next decade rather than the end of this decade, which will mean that the cuts won't be so severe. A number of people have had pay freeze, but of course, let's not forget, in both teaching and in the health service, people get pay progression, and often, although that grade stays at the same level, they've had a promotion or a school.
Sorry, no. There are teachers in this room.
We've had to take some tough decisions, but I'm pleased to say the health service is still, I believe, in good shape, and we've
Colleagues, audience, please show our speakers some respect and let them ask your questions. But obviously, you will have picked up that there are feelings are running high in this room around some of these issues. But please, if you could temper your responses to our panelists, let's listen to them. So, thank you. Well, you finish your point. Yes, thank you. Bill?
I think, the only candidate here who's been in the public service for a long period. I spent over 20 years as an engineer in the scientific civil service. I speak to my colleagues now and again. Very few of them have had a substantial pay rise since I retired 10 years ago. Over 10 years ago. These people are hurting. Most of them joined the public service, people I worked with, because they knew they'd get poor wages compared to what industry paid, but they would have a good pension at the end of it. Well, the good pensions have gone. It's now based on mid-career earnings, not on final salary. The government says it can't afford to pay them anymore. It's a straight choice, and it's a simple one. Do people want income tax to go up, or do people want the public services to keep deteriorating? Because there's got to be money to pay people, and there's no money in the coffers. If you're prepared to pay a penny or two in the pound extra on income tax, then the government can put up the wages. I might add that to my personal opinion. My party has no opinion on public service wages.
Thank you very much, Bill. We'll go on to the second question from Martin. Is Martin here? Thank you.
What does the panel think that the effect of removal of nurse and midwife bursaries will have on recruitment?
Okay, so the effect of bursaries on recruitment of midwives and nurses. So David, will you start this time, please?
I don't see it could possibly have any other effect than to put people off. I fail to see any other way of answering the question. My concern is that we, for a long time, have been slowly, sometimes for good reasons and sometimes for bad reasons, moving this country to a low-wage, insecure economy. And it's a very familiar pattern to anyone who studies economics. There's a whole raft of countries that is their model, and they collectively go by the name of the third world. When various governments talk to you about efficiency, that's Westminster speak for moving you to a low-wage, insecure economy. Because it essentially means you're going to work for longer, for less money, and have fewer rights with which to disagree with your employer. It's taking bursaries away is just one more thing, but it certainly will not be the last. The one you need to watch out for over the next 4 or 5 years is your pension. There is another financial crisis coming, everybody in the markets knows it. This time the threat will not be you must bail us out or you'll lose your mortgage. This time it will be you must bail us out or it will be your pension. So I agree about the bursaries, but it is small beer compared to the problems which are about to hit you.
Thank you, David.
The cutting of bursaries for midwives, I mean, I was born at home, the midwife who delivered me at home, a historical fact. It's appalling that we are no longer training young people. It isn't just, unfortunately, the health service, it's much wider than this. The right-wing economists will say, well, it's cheaper to import somebody from abroad who's been trained at somebody else's expense and then paid UK wages. I have to point out a historical fact that in 1955, before I was born, there was a cabinet meeting with Churchill's Prime Minister, and he was kicked out by Eden and Macmillan, and the Conservative Party have adopted, since 1955, an import cheap Labour Party policy. I don't agree with it. It's wrong. I was fortunate enough that the county council at 18 years of age, gave me a small grant, thank you very much, to go and study electrical engineering for 9 months. It has stood me in such good stead, a 9-month course, and I thank the Conservative Council for that. But unfortunately,
We're going to clap there to be said Conservative.
what I'm getting at is we have a different age here. We have a different philosophy running this country, which is a very dangerous, extreme philosophy. I will not bother before you about that at the moment. The point I will make is we must pay for our own children to receive training in whatever field.
Thank you, Robert.
Well, I've said the previous 2 speakers have actually identified a problem that has beset our country, in that many employers were able to import skilled people from outside the EU, or indeed within the EU, rather than train people here in the UK. That's something that the incoming coalition government understood all too well in 2010 when it came to power, which is why we've brought in a programme of more apprenticeships than ever before. We delivered 3 million apprenticeships between 2010 and 2015. We're set to deliver 5 million apprenticeships between now and the end of this decade. So it's by giving our young people the skills they need that we can actually deliver on that. There's very many apprentices. And it's not just in engineering, it's in admin work, it's in secretarial work, it's in IT. There's lots of areas now that we need more and more apprentices. And it's absolutely right that we should be training our people so we no longer have to rely on people coming in from outside. If you want to see evidence of that, go down to Weapons, see the University Technical College there, a brand new state-of-the-art college, training our people engineering skills, in IT skills, the sort of skills they need to work for local companies rather than relying on people coming inside. We've also introduced the immigration skills charge, which means...
I did ask about bursary.
Yeah, I'm coming on to that.
Can you not make this about immigration? That's the question about bursaries.
Yes. So we have a system in place for people to get skills. Now, in terms of people getting their own training in terms of college skills, we do, unlike the Labour Party, have a system of loans that people can pay back when they're earning over £21,000. We believe that is the way forward. We've also introduced an initiative to have 1,500 more doctors every year trained. So I think important we do have the skills. It's important with the skills levy that we're applying to employers, that companies who don't train skills within their company, and that's right for health service as well, because the health service are paying the skills levy. That 1% levy on their payroll goes into an account which they can draw down to for training their own people. If they don't use it for training, it then goes to other companies or other areas to provide training. It isn't what we get those skills.
Do you mean the apprenticeship levy?
The apprenticeship levy.
Not the skills levy?
Sorry, the apprenticeship levy.
Thank you.
I was getting confused with the immigration skills charge, which is the immigration skills charge is £1,000 per head per year charge, which if you bring a worker in from outside the European Union, you have to pay that particular charge. In our manifesto, we're going to increase that to £2,000 to ensure that people look carefully at the indigenous labour market before they look outside to employ.
Could you answer the question, please?
I think Robert's given you the answer he wants to give.
Yeah.
So if I move on,
That explains.
Nursing bursaries are the last vestige, the last gasp of a system which used to both pay university fees and give students enough to live on. And once again, the nurses are the last ones. To an extent, they've been privileged these last few years. They've been paid for in a way that others, doctors especially, haven't been paid for. Once again, you're in a position where, are you prepared to pay the money? These things cost a great deal of money. Who's going to pay?
The rich.
That's a very good idea. Can you tell me how we're going to get the money off them?
Going to tax them. Charity's going to tax them.
Redistribute the taxes
Now,
in a better way.
listen, I'll be delighted to tax the rich. See me after the meeting and tell me how it can be done. I'm sure we'll sort it out. As regards the problem of bringing staff into the country, I do not see this as a problem. I do not see discriminating between people in the EC and people who are not from the EC with Brexit. I do not see a difference between bringing them in. I have no problem. I believe that about a quarter of the nurses in Scarborough Hospital are from Kerala. They're as highly competent as any nurse from anywhere else. I was in hospital a couple of years ago. I was very poorly. There were very few nurses who came from Europe who attended to me. I think charging people for bringing stuff in from India or the Philippines or South America extra at a time when we're getting out of Europe is absurd. It's just a money-making scheme.
Thank you very much.
Regards to bursaries, I believe this is a tap on this present government to hammer away at our young students, our young people. From training. My own daughter was awarded a bursary many years ago, which put her in great stance. She's now works at Scarborough Hospital. She went through all the training, exams, etc. And this is what our young people need. The Labour Party will reinstate bursaries. Bursaries, look at all the other things that have been taken away, like EMA's educational maintenance allowance. It's just causing an atmosphere of, I'm young, why hammer me? There are certain good things going on in our town, admittedly, but the majority of people, they're being put off from entering all these other societies, all these other associations. So, yeah, let's encourage students, let's get rid of the tuition fees. And the Labour Party is the only party that's going to do this. We're going to And the question is, yes, rightfully asked, where's the money come from? We're going to tax the top 5% of the business. Already been stated today, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. Let's stem that tide. Let's have a fairer country. Let's help our young people.
Steve, I think you've got some education questions if you'd like to pick one of them.
Shall I pick one? I used to work with Alan last road, and I know at Broadbent, and I spoke at the national conference about this, the fact that the Conservative government are taking £3 billion away from education. Okay? My children go to Gloucester Road, and I'm sure other people like that, they're losing over £500,000. Okay? My school at Broadbent, top 1% deprivation area, 10% across the country, we're losing over £300,000 a year. But it's fine, Robert, because your government say, well, we're going to take this away, £1,700 per child will get deprivation. That's going down to £400, but you're raising our free school meal. It's getting nowhere near. Nowhere near. And those children in Eastfield are on poverty line, like 35% of what? The only people who backed the school cuts website pledge to stop these cuts are Eric and David. And I asked the rest of the candidates, why haven't you backed our cuts and stopping them? Because, you know, as everyone's saying, you said, Robert, I'll try and get the point out, I promise, that we get a pay rise. I'm defending people because they're not allowed their pay rise. Part of my union work, they are not allowed pay progression. Okay? I'm one of them. And my wage just gets me through. And I'm very lucky what I'm getting in Scarborough. Get me wrong, got a fantastic wage. But I should be allowed to get what I'm allowed, like that 1% that I've been stopped ever since I started teaching 12 years ago. So back to the original question. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, David, for pledging to stop the school cuts. What's everybody else doing about it?
First of all, I think what I'm going to point out is this horrible thing about not feeding children at school and introducing a minimum nutritional requirement like breakfast. 3 of the 5 a day, of course, is normally in school meals for lunchtime dinner. Come on, it makes sense. Instead of a golden cornflakes at minimal value, which is probably what they do. Please don't forget, it was the Liberal Democrats that introduced the pupil premium. I am sorry to have to say that the pupil premium, so far as I can understand, is now being used to subsidise the rest of school costs.
If you look at every school website, if you look at every school website, if you look at every school website, there's an Ofsted criteria there is a designated document to how the pupil premium is spent.
I'm sure
and it's not spent to pay for my year group's photocopy.
I'm sure it's true, it's I do not deny that. We're just discussing something national here. The pupil premium is being sidetracked and put into the school budget on that. I assure you it is. I don't know. As far as schooling and paying for schools are concerned, it horrifies me that Whitby is extremely upset. People in Whitby are so upset about the lack of educational money in Whitby, a town that will grow in size, not decrease in size. We seem to have lost our whole impetus regards secondary school education funding. I mentioned the pupil premium, I mentioned the idea of the Conservative Party shifting the free school meal to primary schools. Even Edwina Curry was quoted only 2 weeks ago. I'm not a fan of Edwina, but even she said she can't understand why there are 4 million undernourished children in this country. Children can't learn if they're hungry, so obvious. Why are we allowing this to happen?
So stop the cuts then.
Steve,
Well, I'm
Steve,
very much
you've
in
asked your
favour of
question,
that.
please let the candidates
I'm
answer.
very much in favour of this. What you just proposed, we must stop cutting back on education budgets. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Graham. Robert?
Thank you. When I was first elected as Member of Parliament, I made it my job to go and visit as many schools as I could. And I remember going to Pinder School in Easthill when Hugh Mellon was the head, and he was telling me that this school in Scarborough gets about 30% less funding than an equivalent school with equivalent deprivation levels than a school in Bradford or Rotherham. And he said, you know, we lose out in North Yorkshire because we're seen as leafy and wealthy, and that we don't get the funding that had been targeted previously to some of the areas of deprivation. So I think there's general agreement that the existing school funding formula is not fair. It's particularly not fair to North Yorkshire. The government have grasped the nettle and come up with a new formula. And a new formula will end up with winners and losers. And indeed, I've had a lot of letters from people complaining that certainly bigger primary schools in this constituency actually would lose out. I've not had letters, of course, from schools that would gain from the new fairer formula. Just in reading, the Secretary of State has responded to these concerns, and if you look at our manifesto, you'll see that we made a pledge that, unlike the previous plans in terms of school funding, no school will receive a cut to its budget. So that's, I think, responding to what people have said, the budget will stay. And in addition, we put an additional £4 billion, which by 2022 will be in the annual schools budget. Mention was made of Whitby, and I have to say, you're wrong about numbers increasing. The problem with Whitby is that because of second homes and the holiday industry, we're getting fewer and fewer children in Whitby, and so we have a surplus of school places. And it's up to the two schools in Whitby to start working together to try and sort that out. So at the moment, one of the reasons that Whitby is underfunded is because they don't have enough students to fill those places. Now, it may be in a few years' time when the potash mine gets on stream, people move into the area, they start getting jobs. It may well be that we can then have more children in Whitby schools. But the moment we've got a real crisis in Whitby, and the problem is that the two schools in Whitby are not talking to each other, and they're playing a game of beggar and neighbour. It is a problem. Excuse me, man.
Sorry, you can't blame the schools for not talking to each other. They shouldn't need to be talking to each other. They should be funded properly to start with.
School funding comes in two elements. They get the base funding, then per capita funding. So if the school has few students, they get less money, and that's always been the case. The problem is
earlier on you said that North Yorkshire in the old funding was being adversely affected and we were funded lower, and so the new funding formula would benefit North Yorkshire. Is that right?
It benefits North Yorkshire.
North Yorkshire.
Generally,
So
why
have North Yorkshire schools through the new funding fund that lost £28 million? How is that an increase in funding?
It's smaller, it's a larger primary schools that have lost out, which is why we responded to that and made a pledge that no school will get a cut to its funding. So all parents
have got
Can I ask you to please, you have quite a say now, and we haven't heard from all the candidates yet, so please, with your respect, our panellists and give them a chance to answer.
The other point that I would raise is that pupil premium was a great idea. That did help North Yorkshire, because even the smallest primary school in North Yorkshire, in the most affluent village, if it had children that qualified for free school meals, they got the pupil premium, and I think the Liberal Democrats should take credit for bringing that policy forward, and it's a policy that we're sticking with. Because one of the adverse effects, these sort of long-run unintended consequences, in terms of bringing in free school meals for the first 3 years of primary school, is that parents who qualify for free school meals didn't apply for those free school meals because they didn't need to, and therefore they didn't get the pupil premium for those children. I think the policy on now only having free school meals for those who qualify, I think will help in that regard to make sure that everybody who qualifies for free school meals and pupil premium will get it. I think the other point we made is that, I've got children, many of us in the room have children. I think we've got a basic responsibility when we bring children into this world that we should give them good food and good nutrition. I think it's outrageous that many children come to school without having a decent breakfast, which is why we bring in a system where our children can come to school and have breakfast. You know, I see no shortage of children in the schools around here who have other things. You know, they have trains and mobile phones. They have all those other things. When people can't do that, we have free school meals, but I don't think it's a good use of taxpayer money to have universal free school meals for those many wealthy people, the people that we say should be paying more, why they should get free school meals for their children.
I think, Roy, you've picked up the tenor of children's feelings here. I'm coming to you, Eric, after Bill. Thank you.
Education funding. Well, this is something my party looked at quite closely because they picked up on a research programme at the University of Leeds, which came to the conclusion that overall education funding in Yorkshire is approximately 50% of what it is in the South East. Essentially, we're being robbed of 50% of our education budget to pay for somebody else's education budget. And it's just not right. As regards free school meals, if India can give every child in India a free school dinner, why can't we?
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. And I would certainly challenge Robert the fact that nobody in Scarborough where we do school children go to school not hungry. That there are hundreds of children in our constituency going to school hungry. I for a fact know, I mean, my next door neighbour was an ex-head teacher at Broadbent School. The first thing she did at the start of the new term was go across to York to the big supermarkets, buy 500 pair of knickers, because she knew she would need them. She knew she would need all those things, because there's so many children suffering in this area, and they're going to school hungry, they're not going to school in clean clothes, lots of things are happening, so that's one thing that she does. And the fact that Rob also mentioned that in his manifesto it's going to make sure that the schools retain their own budgets. It's not enough. There's inflation, there's the rising students, they need more money, not the same, obviously not less, but it's just that we do need to look after our school children. They're our seed corps, and we need to nurture them and make sure that everything is okay for them. At the moment, that's not happening. The children have got a massive problem, I believe, and we need to put more money into our schools, get this funding formula. It's wrong, it certainly is wrong. We need it readdressing, fixing, talk to local people, talk to local teachers, local headmasters, headmistresses. This is the way forward, not by just having a blanket funding forward across the board.
We're the fifth largest economy in the world. There are only 4 countries that have a larger economy. Why the hell are we having this conversation? It is simply a matter of priorities. Just to take one example, somebody wants to spend 80 billion on nuclear weapons, presumably to keep safe schools that can't afford to give their children schooling on nuclear education. You have to decide what you want to defend. And defending empty phrases and worn-out ideologies, if you want to vote for it, go ahead. Don't expect me to applaud. And when people say, we can't afford it, there's only so much money in the bank. We spent £1.4 billion bailing out the banks. Anyone actually think that we went to the global banks and some bank had a whacking great big room in the back with £1.4 billion coins in it? There is no £1.4 billion anywhere in the world. They printed it up. The banks printed it up. And yet, two major parties will tell you, we can't have governments printing up money. So when it's a terrible thing for governments to print up money, well, we wouldn't have to print this, but fine for the private banks to print it up, and then we borrow for them and pay them interest. We have to stop being obsessed with fighting over the crumbs and saying, I'm sure we can have that crumb, no, you can't have that crumb. Somebody else needs that crumb. And worry about how the entire cake is being baked. Please try to understand that the things you're told are the assumptions you can't question. Those are precisely the things you had better start questioning. Otherwise, you and your children are just going to fight for crumbs.
That obviously provoked quite a fierce debate, so thank you very much for that. The website that Steve referred to is the School Cuts website, and you can go on there and look at your own school or your grandchildren's school or anywhere in the country and find out the impact that the proposed funding formula will have. And it's quite
Which we can now decide from, so we won't cut it.
We'll see. We'll see. The consultation was open. I think it's closed now, but it's good to hear that. So I'm going to open the floor now to other questions. There are some questions here, but I don't have names for them. So if you'd like to indicate, and I'll just take the gentleman there in the white cap, this lady here in the glasses, and the gentleman on the aisle there in the glasses. Mr. Cool. Right, so we've got Mr. Randerson. Randerson.
Councillor Randerson.
Thank you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
My question is not about education or the health service in general. What I'd like to talk about is what the media are certainly not talking about, and that's the national debt. This has been quiet throughout the media all the way through this election campaign for some unreasonable reason. The national debt in 2010 was 811 billion. Then along came Osborne, and a big white charger saying he was going to reduce that by 2015. What in fact has happened is that national debt has now risen to £1.72 trillion. I'm looking now specifically at Robert Goodwill and asking his view on why that has occurred, why hasn't it been reduced, and what the Tory party proposing to do about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Robert first.
Thank you, Chairman. It's important to understand the difference between the deficits, which is your sort of in-year profit and loss account of the government, and the national debt. And you're absolutely right, the debt has gone up to 1.7 trillion. We inherited a deficit of nearly £180 billion a year. We've dragged that down to 48 billion. These are the cuts that have been very painful for everybody, but we had to get the public finances in order. You cannot go on borrowing money as if it's going out of fashion, for goodness sake. We've seen that time and time again in this country. Certainly if you go and look at countries like Greece or Italy or Spain, governments that borrow money that borrow more money than they spend cannot go on forever. And yes, part of that was due to the bailout of the bank, but part of it was due to the fact that under the Brown and Blair government, we were spending more than we were getting in, even during the times of the boom. So when the bust came, it got even worse. We're on top of the public finances now, which means we can make those increases in health funding, we can promise to make more money available for education. My worry is that if Mr Corbyn were to get into Downing Street, I don't know if Eric doesn't have any pictures of Mr Corbyn on his leaflet, but when Mr Corbyn gets into Downing Street, he will ramp up the debt and say he's going to pay for it by increasing tax on companies. That's companies in Scarborough employing people.
Come on, fully funded, fully costed. Yours isn't.
The Institute for Fiscal Studies has looked at the Labour Party's costings, and they bring into question whether the increases in tax to the richest, let's face it, the 4% richest people in this country already pay 40% of the income tax. and whether putting up corporation tax will actually increase that revenue. They think about half of that can be met through the tax proposals that Labour have met. But that's without looking at the additional 50 billion that the Labour Party say they're going to invest in infrastructure, in bringing nationalised industry, bringing private industry into the public sector. That hasn't been costed at all. Every time we've had a restaurant in history, we've had more debt, more borrowing, and we've ended up in a mess that the Conservatives have had to come in and clear up. We did it in 2010, and if Mr Corbyn ever got into power, we'd have to do something about the 22.
As Robert mentioned the Labour Party, I'm going to go to Eric.
Robert's all about they've got the economy going where they want it. And where is it? Where is it now? Do we all feel better off with it? We don't. We do not. We're all feeling the pinch. We've felt the pinch for the last 7 years, and we're told it's the same medicine for the next term of Parliament if the Conservatives get back in. What we need is a reinvestment in this country. We need to look at our industries, our working people, because they're the people that's going to change this, bring this country around. Just by saying that, you know, we've got less borrowing or we're going to bring it down. The people that's got the money, they're fine, they're great, you know, they're enjoying it. But the most feelings of people in this country is that they're not feeling that benefit, and they are going to for another 5 to 10 years. Well, that won't work. I think people in this country have had enough. They want to change. They want a fairer world.
The fact of the matter is, in the period between 1946-47 and 2015-16, on average, the Conservative Party has always borrowed more than the Labour Party, and always paid back less. Because weird things that, although that is the fact, the Tory party claim the opposite, which is they're with the party of low borrowing. That's just actually factually not true. The other thing I'd like to say is this. People go on about the debt, that was the actual question. And Robert said countries that borrow more over a long period don't do so well. The debt of America is 13 trillion. And has been for a long time. It is not how much debt you have. Okay? If you own a corner shop, you can't have a vast debt. If you're a Ford Motor Company, you can have a vast debt. The question is, what do you use the debt for? If you rack up a large debt and do nothing economically sensible with it, like, for instance, bail out your mates in moribund banks, then you will have a problem. If you take the exact same amount of debt and you put it into the small, medium enterprise sector of this economy, you will have no problem. It is not about how much debt, it's about what you do with it. Both of these parties have done foolish things with that money because they think that they have to bail out the banks, even though the banks aren't what making your living work.
Thank you.
Something Mr. Goodwill said, I actually read the report from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, and the gap between funding...
Sorry, could you put the line?
The gap between funding and revenue, the Labour Party manifesto was 9 billion gap that they couldn't find, and they actually criticised the Conservative government for not funding any of them, not explaining the funding of any of their policies, just grabbing figures out there like 6.7 pence for a breakfast, 50 million a year, plucked out the air, which means nothing, because it's completely untrue, and nothing is. So if you're going to quote the Institute of Fiscal Studies, try and quote all of it correctly.
and then Graham wants to say something as well.
Yeah, well, certainly on the issue of corporation tax, you sometimes find rather counterintuitive that if you reduce a tax, you actually get more tax from that. And certainly with the top rate of tax, that's often the case, that if you make a tax competitive, not only do you encourage people from around the world to come and live in the UK and pay tax here, companies to come and set up their headquarters here and to invest in this country, but so you actually can get more tax when you reduce those rates of tax. And my worry would be that by increasing corporation tax in the UK, we send a signal around the world that the UK is not a place to come and invest, not a place to do business, because you'll receive punitive levels of taxation. And if you look, for example, at how the Republic of Ireland pulled themselves out of the mire by having very competitive rates of corporation tax, that is an example, I think, that we should follow. We have, of course, reduced tax for the very poorest. We've increased the personal allowance, and we'll increase it in this Parliament to £12,500. That's the amount you earn before you pay any income tax at all. That will mean 3 million people have been taken out of tax altogether, and our cuts to personal taxation have meant that 31 million people are paying less tax than they would have been. Reducing tax gives people more power, gives them money to spend on their own families, and it gives them money to invest in the economy and create jobs. We have the highest level of employment in this country in history. More people with work, more people able to care for their families, to put food on their table, to pay for the things that their families need. And I'm very proud of the fact that the United Kingdom have created more jobs since 2010 than the rest of the European Union put together. This has been an economic success story, and now is not the time to smash that to smithereens. I think take us back to the 1970s with high punitive levels of tax, which would result in an exodus of people from this country, exodus of companies, and an exodus of jobs.
Oh my God, somebody tell something.
I'm afraid that I've got to say that this is exactly the sort of party political squabbling that's completely Westminster based and has absolutely, utterly nothing to do with anybody here except the gentleman sitting on my left who's a government minister. None of us are in a position to affect the national debt or the gross national product. Not one iota, none of us. This is just Westminster squabbling. This is professional and semi-professional politicians arguing over numbers on the page. It's not about us. It's about the banks. It's about Westminster. And it's what's wrong with politics in this country.
Thank you, Bill.
Sounds like it.
Unharnessed capitalism is a very dangerous animal, okay, which is what we are discussing. Economics and minefield at the best of times. There has been talk of the so-called Robin Hood tax. Now, according to the United Nations, and Barack Obama adopted this, he was very serious about it, there are £30 trillion worth of assets sat in offshore bank accounts. The Cayman Islands, Bermuda, Curacao, Belize, which interestingly happens to be the place of the bank owned by a certain donor of the Conservative Party. Hear me out. Barack Obama was not happy about cocaine money laundering in the United States. Belize, by the way, is in Central America, conveniently just north of Colombia, the cocaine producing country, and the United States, the biggest market. The United Nations estimates that cocaine and heroin and other illegal narcotics are the fourth biggest traded commodity in the world. We are talking sums of money we can only dream about. Barack Obama made a speech. There are 270 registered limited companies in one building in the Cayman Islands. And he said that is either the biggest corporate building in the world or the biggest tax dodge in the world. When this gentleman, who happens to be a Conservative Party donor, pays for various Conservative Party expenses in at least the last two general elections, When he got off his plane in the United States Drug Enforcement Agency arrested him and interviewed him, put him back on his plane and said, please don't bother coming back to the United States. Subsequently, 2 of our high street banks were fined, and they both have branches here in Scarborough and everywhere else in Whitby. 2 of our high street banks were fined £1.1 billion and £1.3 billion respectively. We are talking about unharnessed capitalism. It is out of control. Barack Obama knows it. I suspect that most of us here know it. Unfortunately, Bill was quite right. What are we to do about it? One thing is for sure. The Labour Party and the Conservative Party are both complicit in this.
Thank you. I'm going to move on. This lady here in the glass, she's been waiting very patiently. Here's the front. Sorry. No, that's fine. I'm sorry, it's not your turn yet. Sorry, I've got you on my list.
Hi, I'm not going to stand up because there's more people behind me than in front of me, and that'd be rude. My question's about privatisation of public services, and it occurs to me that this government are actually pushing through the privatisation agenda of public services, despite little or no evidence that that leads to better outcomes for the public. The clues in the title, public services, they are there for the public. Privatisation leads to people making money, and we should never ever make money out of public services. They are there to provide a service. My own service, the probation service, some of you may or may not know, was part privatised back in 2014 when the Prime Minister was the Home Secretary, so it was on her watch. 70% of the service was privatised. The service has been decimated. The contracts are failing dismally. There are numerous serious further offences because people on probation are not getting supervised properly. So my question to the panel is, would you aim to renationalise public services, not only my own, but all public services? That's health, the railways, the police, education, the whole caboodle. They are public services, they should be in the public domain, and how would you aim to achieve that? Thank you.
My policy has come to a conclusion that the way public services, and especially the health and social care system, is organised in this country, is not fit for purpose, it's not managed well. It needs reorganisation, it needs the 2 arms, the social care and the medical side, to be integrated into each other. Because at the moment, there's a hiatus. The handover between the NHS and the local social care people just doesn't work. And I'm on the board of trustees of a charity which spends its time picking up the pieces after people come out of hospital and goes and trains people how to claim the right money from the council. And does this sort of thing. It's got a dozen field workers just in this area. That this needs doing is a scandal in itself. It shouldn't be necessary. The whole thing should fit together like a jigsaw. As regards the police, I was challenged the other day by a man in a yellow jacket who said to me, you can't do something. I said I couldn't do it. And I looked at him in blank astonishment and said, who are you? And he said, I work for so-and-so. And he said, if you don't do what I tell you, I'll call the policeman. Now, in today's world, calling a policeman is not a trivial act. So I said, please go away and stop bothering me. What I should have said, and I regret not saying it, is, you act in the office of constable here, and I missed out there, I'm sorry, I'll do it next time. But what is happening is we're being privatised. And we're being privatised. It's being privatised to people who are on a minimum wage and have a uniform and 3 days training somewhere. To get these people to administer public order on any level is asking for trouble. If you would prove that, I'm deeply worried by these characters in yellow jackets and red berets who wander around Scarborough on Saturday nights. Because one day they're going to run into somebody bigger and nastier than they are, and somebody's going to catch up on them. These organisations worry me. On the other hand, the main justification for increasing the police appears to be terrorism. Now, that people are saying we've lost 20,000 policemen, and this bomb went off the other night. Terrible slaughter. If we had 200,000 policemen, it wouldn't have made any difference to that attack whatsoever. But on the other hand, if you say to people, very well then, we either employ 500,000 policemen, or we put troops on the street permanently, or we listen to your communications. None of these things is acceptable. People have got to decide what they're prepared to tolerate. People have to decide how much intrusion in their lives they're prepared to tolerate and who they're prepared to tolerate it from. And I think that's all I've got to say.
Thank you very much.
Marvel's question, I think it shows the difference between political parties. Privatisation is just what this country is going through. The lady mentioned the probation service. Perfect example. I could give you dozens of other ones. There's the NHS, there's the North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue, there's the police. But what's happening, what's happening really is that all you're doing is you're selling off the family silver to shareholders. And we know from the fact that what happens when you do that. I mean, I just look at the local bus services. That's happened years ago. We sold public transport off. All the cream, all the bus stations were sold off. And what's left now? Look at Scarborough. We've not even got a bus station. I mean, it's as bad as that. You argue that the point and say, well, you don't need a bus station. The buses are happy just going around in circles. What a load of nonsense. But with the NHS, the STPs, that they're a body which actually they're looking into ways of slicing off the NHS and privatising it. I think the nurses call it the slash, trash and privatise system. But that's what's happening. But the answer, what the Labour Party, we believe that we will stop that. We will call a halt to all this privatisation. We'll halt, we'll review it, and we will stop it. The railways, that's another good example. We've got to stop selling off everything that we own and giving the monies back to the people, the shareholders that are getting all the rewards for it, and the people that are working for it are worse off. It's not a system that works. We've got to go back to the sort of days when you worked for what you earned and it paid. And you had a regular job, you had regular contracts, get rid of all these zero-hour contracts. Let's go back to a land where things worked in those days and get away from this financial mess that we're in now.
Thank you very much.
I think public services should be owned by the public. There's no reason for them to be privatised. I know of no evidence anywhere in the world that shows you that a privatised public service is more efficient in financial terms, let alone in delivering the service, than a public one. For instance, America, the great bastion of the free market. In a study by an American think tank, the Commonwealth think tank, based in New York, in 2014, I believe it was, the American system came out bottom in every single measure. The NHS came out top. This is an American study. America, amongst OECD countries, has the 5th highest infant mortality rate of all OECD countries. Is that the system we want? Because that's the private system. Okay? The railways. When the East Coast, when the whole holder of that franchise walked away and said, oh, it's costing too much. And we had to pick up the cost. And it became East Coast, owned by and staffed by those dreadful, lazy, no good public servants. It made a profit. Well, I think it was 4 or 5 years.
And it was a better service.
It was a better service, because that's a bit bigger. So it made a profit, a public service, and then the Tories thought, we can't have this, so they privatised. For no reason at all, except pure ideology. The water companies, oh, they're so much better when they're not owned by the state. But Yorkshire Water is owned by the state, just not ours. So the notion that you were sold by Mrs. Thatcher and a generation with some kind of masochistic inferiority complex, said, oh, really, all people did. They just swallowed something that had no basis in fact. Can we reprivatise them? Yes, in different ways. With the rails, you just simply wait for the franchise to be over and say, thank you, will you wait, goodbye. With water, you cannot say to them, we'll buy the shares off you. What you simply do is you link to the press that you're going to privatise it. The shares drop through the floor, and then you buy them for the...
You mean nationalise it?
Yeah, sorry. And then you nationalise it. Then you buy the shares on the open market for whatever they're worth, so that one would be nothing. And the shareholders would take it off. And when they say, oh, that would ruin your pension, it would not ruin your pension. Your pension is ruined now. Because it hasn't grown, because interest rates have been close to zero. Your pension is stuck because of how they're trying to fix it.
Thank you, David.
I'm flattered that David stole my story of Yorkshire Water. Didn't quite. The reality is that Yorkshire Water is one of those 270 companies in that big corporate building in the Cayman Islands, which is probably a letterbox. Okay, well, I'll get it right next time. Tell us the story. Anyway, that's funny. Okay. I'll forgive you. I'm flattered. Let's talk about Yorkshire Water. It's one of our big hates. We're drinking it. The company, that is, not the substance. We could easily sort that out. We could easily sort it out. In 2015-2016, made £193 million profit, should pay 20% corporation tax. But the Conservative Party would say, you can't do that. They'll move their assets abroad. They'll move abroad. Well, the reservoirs in Yorkshire aren't wide, but I'll tell you, they're actually moving all them to the Cayman Islands. We can easily do this. It's a bit radical. I'm happy to say that there is a big radical tradition in the Liberal Party and the Liberal Democrats. I'm so happy to say this. What we do is we open a Cayman's offshore water authority bill. We open an account, we pay our money into it, we take 20% corporation tax, thank you very much. We send the rest off to the Cayman Islands. We can easily tax Yorkshire Water. It will take a radical step. I'm prepared to do it. Okay? That is a fact. What you mentioned, I answered the question, which I apologise for, just following up on what David said. This is what I would like to say about privatisation. Vince Cable said something very interesting here in Scarborough at the YMCA. Network Rail is publicly owned. I'm happy to say that what he said was we could use as one or two examples, certainly the route you mentioned between London and Edinburgh, as a benchmark. Privatisation is a tricky subject. BP was originally 51% state-owned. Okay? And we all gained from that as shareholders. It's what Vince Cable was pertaining to. We all gained from that. We took 51% of the profits. And the 49% was left to whoever wanted it. What my problem with privatisation is that unfortunately, if they're going to put that money in the West Indies, we don't see any of those profits. And that's the problem. I come back to unharnessed capitalism. We cannot allow laissez-faire economic policy, that has been adopted by Margaret Thatcher and ever since. Now, I don't want to bore you about the Glass-Steagall economic arrangement with Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1933, but it's absolutely on the nail. Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the Glass-Steagall arrangement set up in 1933 lasted until 1983, until monetarism
audience members who've indicated they want to speak. If you want to speak on this topic, and then I'm going to ask Mr. Goodwill to come in at the end. So the gentleman there in the tracksuit jacket, is it on this on privatisation?
It was relevant. Well, the NHS privatisation.
Yes, please go ahead.
I want to just coming back to the NHS first of all, I only turned 18 in 2004 when Labour was in power. And at that time, my auntie contracted narcotising fasciitis. A very nasty, if you're not familiar, most of you might be, it's MRSA, but where MRSA comes from an open wound, the other one, it can attack anywhere. Now, she was through Scarborough Hospital, Reed Hospital, Castle Hill, Upper Royal, and bear in mind, Labour's now so pro-NHS. Every single one of those hospitals, she received exceptional care. All of them were filthy, and I mean. I worked in intensive care unit, and we were sat by her side. She never died twice. And I witnessed them come round and clean. They never even swept under the bed. It was a quick. This is an intensive care, like of all places, right? I had. In the election of 2005, I had the representative for Laurie Quinn phone me. I put my concerns to him. His response was, well, questionable. Mr. Goodwill, who was the prospective candidate, and I lived in the Castle Ward, he knocked on my door with the prospective Conservative council at that time, and I put my concerns to you. And you turned basically sideways to me, looked down the street and gave your answer. And I decided then I couldn't trust somebody who couldn't look me in the eye and give his answer.
But I did go to Scarborough Hospital, spend a day with the cleaners, cleaning the hospital, learning how to clean in the wards, learning the problems in the wards. And so, when I got elected, I went to the hospital because dirty hospital was a major issue in that general election. It's one that I think we've certainly got to talk to the MRSA and see diff at Scarborough Hospital by simple things like cleaning, simple things like hand cleaning, and that is an awful lot better than it was in those days, as we said.
First of all, under Labour, prior to turning 18, I've been on through the mental health system. I've had mental health. I'm delighted now that mental health is being put on the agenda. I'm great that it's on the radar. I've suffered the stigma. I've been turned away from jobs and all the rest of it. Hence why I wanted to get involved. Right? And like now, fast forward a little bit, more recently, under, you've been in power since 2005. I had a neurological issue since 2014. I got referred to, I've been to Hull Royal for it and saw people there on the NHS. More recently, it got worse. I was referred to York. I got a letter, I still got it at home, saying we cannot see you due to limited resources. I was completely just turned away. When I'm actually going private, suddenly I could be seen. And I had to pay £250 to see a neurologist. And do you know what hung around the doctor's neck that I saw at York? An NHS ID card. I saw the same doctor that I would have seen on the NHS. So, I guess my question would be, to each of the panellists, why are you the party to trust on the NHS, specifically with infection control, stopping privatisation, and mental health?
I'm going to take some more audience comments, and if the panellists could keep what you've said in mind, and then come back to it in their answers. So I'm just keen that we hear from our audience as well. So there's the lady with the short hair who's not listening at the moment, right at the back.
Heather. I just had a question. I got a little bit confused with Graham and the analogy of the 270 companies. But I think this is sort of NHS based. What will the impact be if the Liberal Democrats decide to legalise Class C drugs and make £1 billion a year of them? Was he expecting to be able to have the same success as Columbia and therefore pay off more debts that way? Because I know, like the gentleman here, mental health problems are very relevant at the moment, and Class C and A and B drugs can be the starting point for all that.
Thank you very much. And the lady in the middle here with the...
It will help probation caseloads.
Not you, sorry. The lady in the middle, yes.
It was actually a different question.
Doesn't mind over.
It was actually a different question. Is that all right at this point?
If you want to say it now, then panellists will keep it in mind.
I just wondered if the panellists are as happy as I am that after the horrific attack in Manchester last week, far from the Tories being able to use those attacks to divide us and to divert from their, as the Sunday Times called their bombing manifesto, the result has actually been unity and a reduction in the Tories' lead and widespread acceptance of the tenets of Jeremy Corbyn's speech, which were that it's actually bombing overseas that causes terrorism at home.
Thank you. Steve, you have a question, but I'm going to leave you on to one side as you've already spoken, and it's this lady on the aisle just here.
I am totally against highway fracking. And I would like to see the members of the panel stand up who would burn fracking.
Can you stand up if you ban fracking?
Stand up in fracking, okay.
If
they would stand, if they agreed with banning fracking, yes.
I'm a member of the North Yorkshire Planning, so I should really declare an interest, but I think that's right.
Okay, so we've got several questions. If I just summarise where we are, we've been talking about the privatisation of cleaning services in hospitals, the issues around mental health, which party we might trust with the NHS in general, about legislation of Class C drugs and where that might go in terms of income generation, I think, part of the question. The terrible events that have happened, have they produced unity? Has Jeremy Corbyn got the right idea in terms of why terrorism has its roots? I'm summarising your questions, and then the question on fracking, which I think has been answered by some of the panel. So I'm going to start with Eric. We're running out of time, so I'm going to ask you to cover all those areas as much as you can in the time available.
Right, starting off with the NHS, I mean, let's not forget how it first started. After the war, this country was in a bit of bankruptcy, and it was the Labour Party that started the NHS for all people that needed it and free use. I'm told, I wasn't very old at that time, I'm told there was one Conservative MP that voted for it. So I think that tells you the picture where, the Labour Party is 110, 200% behind the NHS, and we will always fight to keep it for everybody and invest in it. That's the main thing. It needs the investment. We are going to put £30 billion in the NHS over the next Parliament. When elected, I won't say if elected, I'll say when elected. So it's, we will invest in the NHS, the staff, all the equipment. And I'm pleased to say, regards your question on mental health, that is now taking a prime focus of all the Labour Party. It has done for many years, but I think 1 in 4 person actually can get mental health problems in their lifetime. So it's something which we're all very much aware of. And regards to the cleanliness of hospitals, gosh, we have moved on, you know, over the years, but all I can say is that, yeah, I don't go into hospital that much. I've not been like Robert cleaning up, but when I do go and visit, to me they are sort of just halls of cleanliness, and I wouldn't like to run to that spot that you were. I would have been banging on doors in Westminster. So I'm totally behind what you're saying. Regards to the drugs, vast subject. My gut feeling is, you know, we can't legalise it. We have vulnerable young children, and all of a sudden, if you sat there watching the telly smoking some marijuana, to me it's not good. It's not good. That's my heart talking now. Things may change in the future, but perhaps it's my age group where, you know, drugs should be for making me better. Thank you.
I should have said that I was giving people 4 minutes to respond.
Oh,
so at the time of the end, you won't give you 4 minutes, so we'll So, David.
Privatising the NHS, we're told that we can't afford to have the NHS with an ageing population. And the fact of the matter is you can't afford not to have it. If you want to have European South in America, do you know how much it costs? 18,000 quid. If you have to have a C-section in America, it costs 16,000 quid. Could you afford it? No. The people who could afford it, who've got £16,000 in the bank, they want to spend all of their money on their C-section, on their appendix, and none on helping you with yours. That's the difference of the philosophy. We have to afford the NHS, otherwise lots of people would die. So just don't. I lived in America and I saw people die because there was a strict choice between dad's pills or the kids' food. I know the man who died because of that decision. He lived in country. So we have to afford it. Class C drugs legalisation, I understand the concern about legalising drugs. The fact of the matter is, some of the most damaging drugs are legal. And I'm not talking about prescription drugs, they're a problem too. But the problem is, scientifically, chemists can produce drugs now which they can sell and that they get around the law, and it's an absolute epidemic. So I don't think we can just say, oh, ban drugs, we're going to have to move on. I'm not saying just legalising them is a good idea, but if we don't have a proper conversation, and not just a booyah throwing stones at each other conversation, we'll get there. We might all feel slightly more, you know, having advertised our moral position, but we won't. Corbyn speaks on terrorism? Yes. I mean, come on. If you go and bomb several countries back to the Stone Age, it's always liberating. You notice how we're always spreading democracy at the end of a bayonet? We've annihilated any semblance of civilization in Syria. We've done pretty much the same for Libya. Afghanistan was already doing too well. Do we really think that we can do this and it doesn't? The waves of that don't hit our shores? Come on, what reality are we living in? Banning fracking, yes, of course, it's the stupidest technology I ever heard of. and it won't make any money for anyone except from the shareholders.
But to be kind to Eric, which is a gentleman, I'm afraid I've got to be careful with history, okay? I hate to be a know-all. The National Health Service was a direct result of William Beveridge. He was the Liberal MP for Berwick and Tweed, and okay? Actually, he was genuinely appalled at the bureaucratic disaster that what his own party had done to the National Health Service. However, that is a historical fact, okay? And I won't to dwell on it. I certainly don't want to see the Health Service. My own view particularly is the 1% tax has got to be a good idea. Ring-fence £1 billion a year for mental health care. I mean, come on, 1%, we haven't even going to notice it, have we? Okay, that's national level health policy. And as I said, we've got some misleading statistics from the Institute of Fiscal Studies. There will definitely question what's going on with the sums and whether that sums came out approved. Okay, do all of that. Weed, we are discussing cannabis. What a wonderful development that is. It is already more or less legal. £9 or less, the police don't prosecute anybody for growing it. I understand that the mental health implications of growing weed are simpler than you might think. If you have a corrupt, not corrupt, let's use the better word, if you have an underground system growing homegrown weed, the chances are they are using chemicals that are not healthy. I have an organic garden, I don't have any form of cannabis plants going in, where I have lots of bees and butterflies. The point I'm trying to make is that if you can legalise it and regulate it, you don't need to use intensive chemicals. The reality is this, and I hate to be rude about this, but it is. It would seem that the problem with psychosis and smoking weed are the chemicals that are used. If you use chemicals to produce cheap food in the United States, beef, oh dear, it's coming to raise a bears anyway, we are going to be eating growth hormones and goodness knows what else. It's the chemicals that send people into a mental health state, not the actual cannabis plant itself. I hasten to add, GW Pharmaceuticals grow cannabis on a massive scale right here in Yorkshire. And it's at the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Foods it used to be, just outside Yorkshire, okay, but not lovely. I'm actually working not too close. Producing it as a spray, Sativex spray, for multiple sclerosis sufferers, okay, and it works very well. It's a pain relief. Don't be fooled. There are lots of elderly people who are in nursing homes right here in Scarborough who like a little smoke on a night. It helps their arthritis and rheumatism, and I'm not going to be hypocritical about it. I am not entirely upset myself. My rheumatism is terrible. Something to do with working. Anyway, that's by the by. As regards to cleanliness, there's a good observation that. I went to your hospital, and I asked the top surgeon there, who is the most important in your hospital after the patients? And he was there with all his mates, all done, ready for an operation, I'm doing light fittings and all that. And they all looked at each other and said, well, it's obvious who's the most important person in the hospital. It's obvious, isn't it? You know, the question didn't he ask me. And I said, it's the cleaner. If you haven't got a clean hospital, you've got a death cabinet. And Florence Nightingale learned that to her expense in the Crimea War. All the way back on that, but unfortunately she was heartbroken. She realised that her hospital was in fact at a lower recovery rate than the field hospital. Anyway, that's by the way. She never forgave herself by the way. She told me about it. But the lesson was learned about the importance of cleanliness. Please talk about foreign policy. Please talk about foreign policy. I'm sorry. Foreign policy. Go on.
Thank you. I absolutely support the founding principles of the National Health Service, that it should be there to meet the needs of everyone, that it should be a clinical need, not the ability to pay, and it should be free at the point of use. They're the fundamental principles of the health service, what makes it special, and it's why I always fight to keep the National Health Service. Indeed, the Conservative Party has been the custodian of the National Health Service for more years since 1945 than the Labour Party. It is still in good health. Now, in terms of delivering services, it has always been a mixture of private and public supply. And you can have an argument whether the cleaners should be employed by a private contractor or they should be employed directly by the hospital. The fact is, if the hospital's clean, I don't care. If it's done cost effectively, I don't care. General practice is only private. Every single GP practice around the country is a small, self-employed, private business.
Sorry about that, brother. I am really.
Every single GP practice in the country is a small, self-employed private business. They supply fantastic services. Similarly, community pharmacies are either big companies like Boots or small community pharmacies working in parallel with the National Health Service. Under the last Labour government, they introduced many more operations which they procured in the private sector. And I didn't get one single constituent complaining to me that they'd gone to the Nuffield Hospital at York for their hospital rather than necessarily having it in Scarborough or somewhere else. So it's a partnership. We need to make sure we give the best service for our people, whether that's procured privately or procured within the health service. It's not really a relevant issue. In terms of cannabis, I would never vote to legalise cannabis. I've seen the damage that skunk and other types of synthetic cannabis have caused in this community. That's without even getting to the area of people in the workplace, people driving. If we had more cannabis around, there'd be a lot more problems. I'm very proud that when I was a transport minister, we brought forward legislation to actually make it easier to convict people of drug driving, and indeed dozens of people have been convicted in this area for drug driving since that new legislation came along. In terms of the privatisation generally, we've seen some big success stories from privatisation. Look at companies like Rolls-Royce, look at Jaguar Land Rover, company creating jobs like no one has done before in the motor industry in this country. We've seen great successes. The rail industry, and I'm a similar age to, well, a bit younger than Eric, but I can remember the British Rail, and I don't remember it quite as in such rose-tinted light as he did. British Rail was lacking in investment, and it's interesting that around Europe, people are looking at our franchising model where the track belongs to the state, but the operators come and bid for franchises. And indeed, we're going to get a second service as well as the hourly service on the line into Scarborough, because Northern Rail are going to have another service running in parallel in competition with TransPennine. Finally, a point about the terrorist attack. We all condemn the terrorist attack, and let's not affect, it's not the first time that we've had an attack on our soil. I think we should bear in mind, that the 9/11 attack on the United States was done before the Iraq War. That was not a response to some sort of intervention. That was done before. If you go online, during the speech that Hilary Benn gave during the debate in Parliament before the vote on whether we should intervene in Syria, that was a very strong point I think we made, that we must try and prevent those places, whether they're in Afghanistan or Libya or in Syria or in Iraq, where terrorists can train, where they can actually make sure that they don't have that ability to train and make bombs and do all those things that would come to affect us. And let's not forget also that countries like Belgium and Sweden have been attacked. It isn't the fact that we've been involved in these United Nations operations, it's that they hate our very way of life. They hate our freedom. They have democracy, and the terrorists do anything to prevent us doing that. That's what they're attacking us for, not because of some issue that isn't involved there.
2 years ago, I woke up in intensive care in Scarborough Hospital after an 8-hour operation. I spent a week in intensive care and 8 weeks in hospital altogether. The hospitals throughout were immaculate. The cleaners were conscientious, worked hard, but almost what I thought was almost hours. I have no problem with cleanliness in hospitals. Moving on from that, part of the time, I was on something called intravenous dimorphine, which is pharmaceutical heroin. And it's marvellous. But when they took it away, it went away. I'm not an addicted personality. As regards cannabis, the stuff is openly smoked on the streets in Scarborough. It's greatly less pernicious than alcohol. And the state of Colorado in the United States made very nearly $130 million in tax. That's £100 million in tax in 1 year from legalising cannabis. Now we come to the bombing of the Middle East. This was a matter of some discussion in my work, where I worked in the defence sector. And I came to the conclusion that I had no objection to the great liberal democracies of the West, unseating dictators. The problem is the aftermath. We've forgotten how to clean things up after we've turned the monster out. And that is something that really does need looking at. But again, I have no problems with throwing the monsters out. As regards to the outrage recently in Manchester, I don't think this young man cared one jot about where we'd bombed and where we hadn't bombed. His father and his family fought against Gaddafi, as we did. At the end of that war, his father was able to return to his homeland. This young man wasn't moved to go bombing because we've gone somewhere 1,000 miles away. He went to bombing because he wanted to blow something up. And that's all there is to it. He was an angry young man, and that was his outlet. What his mental problems were, and I believe there were some, and what his own problems were his own business. What was wrong with his ability to get access to training and co-conspirators and the machinery to make it back. I pity him as much as I pity the children who died, because he's as much a victim as they are. What we've got to do is try and somehow drive this nihilistic form of Islam that wants to destroy the West out of this country, and preferably out of the rest of the world, because he's doing none of us any good.
Okay, thank you. Now, I have two people indicate they want to speak, but also Mr. Coer has waited very patiently. And I'm going to say if it can be a brief question, and the panellists are going to have a very brief time to answer it. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, first of all, it's not Mr. Coer, it's Phillips.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's my wife.
I'm so sorry.
So we've got our own name.
Yes.
Yes, I was going to come back to something that we did mention briefly before about the fact that we have the biggest ever national debt that this country has ever had, and it's now going to be continuing to grow until 2025. And I'm just wondering how this can be called a stable government if we're going to be increasing this national debt so much.
Well, thank you. As you say, we have mentioned that before, so I'm just going to very quickly go to the other two speakers. Is the gentleman there in blue shirt?
Yeah, Jeff Bowler from Scarborough Christian Fellowship. I just thought, we have talked a lot about the national debt. I was read recently about the government review of NHS A&Es. They proposed to close 38 nationally, including our own, quite possibly. No. And that's from senior members of the health service. In view of that, why are we renewing Trident, something I don't want you to use? It seems extremely expensive and woefully obsolete if we're balancing rules.
Thank you. And I think there's a gentleman here in the check shirt. No, in the red and white check. Do you have a question? Sorry, there was somebody else on this side. Oh no, it was the gentleman there in the red and white stripe. Sorry. I've written down checks instead of stripes. Sorry.
Unfortunately, this gentleman before me sort of last stolen a question, but there's another one, particularly addressed to Robert Goodwill. He talked about his illustrious career so far, but as Immigration Minister, along with your boss Amber Rudd, you reneged on a parliamentary agreement by Alf Dubs to allow thousands of refugee children into the country, yet you found 2 million to build a wall in Calais. Doesn't this show a lack of humanity that reflects on you and your party? Yes.
Probably a mistake to ask two more questions. We've broken down very wide areas, so it's going to be difficult for the panel to respond to those three areas, but I'm sure they'll give it a go as briefly as you can. So start with you, Robert.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the debt, we understand the need to do so in a way that doesn't damage our public services, which is why we've extended the timetable to 2025. There is no threat to A&E at Scarborough. I know emails are flying around. In the election, people make these claims. Over my dead body, they will close accidents and emergency at Scarborough Hospital. Last year, on immigration, we took 8,000 children into this country last year. The Dubs Amendment refers to a specific group of people. They're the children, unaccompanied children in France, Italy and Greece. We're concerned about the pull factor because people coming across to Greece, drowning in the Aegean, drowning in the Mediterranean, we want to get rid of that pull factor, which is why we agreed to take 20,000 children and their families from the area around Syria, from the refugee camps in Jordan, Lebanon and Turkey. I'm proud that we're doing that. They're the most vulnerable, not the ones that pay the people smugglers to get themselves to Calais. And finally, what was the last point? Yes, I believe we need strong defences and renewal of driving is central to that.
Thank you.
I spent over 20 years working with the defence prisoners. As part of my duties, I spoke to a number of very senior Army, Navy and Air Force officers. On a number of occasions, I said, what's a reasonable target for our nuclear weapons after the fall of the Soviet Union? And they all looked me straight in the face and said, I can't think of one. Politicians need them. That's it, full stop, new paragraph. There's no use for the bloody things. If there was a reasonable use, then they should buy it. But you can buy free-fall hydrogen bombs and bolt them underneath aeroplanes for pennies compared to what we're spending on these submarines. And the British developed some spectacularly effective hydrogen bombs at the end of the airborne weapons series. Why are we paying all this money for submarines that have no use?
Thank you.
As regards the other issue...
Very sorry. Eric?
Yes, on the debt situation, when we eventually negotiate leaving the EU, we need to protect the jobs, we need to protect our British jobs and the skills, and all that will be a great factor in dealing with the debt process that we have at this moment in time. So we can't just afford to walk away like Theresa May wants to do. We need a good deal when we actually leave with the Brexit situation. Regards the walls and the refugees, yeah, Mr. Trump wants to build a wall in Mexico, building walls in Calais. It's about time we stop building these walls and start building bridges. That's my opinion. It's a deterrent. Long may it be a deterrent. Let's pray for it that it will never be used. But we do need some form of deterrent. And I think as the years go on, we can hopefully wind down. I think that's Jeremy Corbyn's intention and his views. Thank you.
Trident, I don't believe that we should renew Trident. What is it protecting us from? Who is it protecting us from? None of the people that attacked us in the last 60 years would be a suitable person to drop an atomic bomb. And also, is it right to drop an atomic bomb on anyone? No. I don't think it is. Immigration, I think we should stop focusing on the immigrants that are here in our debate and say, why are we creating an immigration policy?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. We have a foreign policy which is creating immigration. People aren't leaving Syria because they're just looking forward to standing around in the rain. They're leaving Syria because it's been bombed back to Lebanon. So perhaps we should stop bombing their countries.
Yes.
And then we have as for the debt, as I said, it's not how much debt you have, it's what you do with that debt. We can afford a large debt, but not if we do stupid things with it, which is what we have.
I think it's right.
It's impossible to turn off that as well. Right, go.
Okay, thanks. I've just come back from my point of made before. I mean, alcohol, whether we like it or not, it can be really early in Yorkshire, that stuff, or it can be blinding stuff called poaching or something dreadful. It's a whole spectrum of stuff, alcohol. In my opinion, it is the worst drug on the market, and it's legal, of course.
course. Foreign policy, I'd like to come back to that. We create problems with the world, we know that we do. It's an awful thing that's happened in Manchester, of course it is. Margaret Thatcher had British scientists giving Saddam Hussein the chemical weapons know-how and all that. Why, I don't know. However, that is a fact, okay, and I studied it and wrote essays on it. Okay, that is by the by. Why on earth we allow George W. Bush, ExxonMobil, the company behind fracking, by the way, make no mistake, they got the patent on fracking. Why we allow George W. Bush to drag us into the Middle East, I just don't understand. And the members of Parliament of the Labour Party and the Conservative Party voted for that. And Charles Kennedy was right, wasn't he? He said no, and the Liberal Democrats said no. And for some bizarre reason, the people of this country voted the same MPs back in who had voted for this dreadful mess in Iraq. However, I will try and end on a good note, okay? I despair sometimes of what people are thinking of. Trident, it's hilarious. What use is Trident when we've had a terrorist attack in Manchester? I mean, it would be laughable were it not so heartbreakingly serious. It's absolutely horrendous. The 2K agreement was signed between Tony Blair and Jacques Chirac. It put the border of Britain on the south coast of England and on the north coast of France, and has worked to a greater or lesser degree. As immigration minister, I'd like to know what happens if President Macron says, that's it, we're putting the border back in Dover. How much is that going to cost, Mr. Goodwill?
Thank you very much.
Just on that last point, the 2K agreement, which is that, when you leave the country, you go through French passport control, so when you arrive in France, you clear, vice versa. We don't have the 2K agreement for the connection between, say, Nice and Leeds Bradford Airport. That's just the carrier checks that you're eligible for and you've got the correct documentation. So if the 2K agreement did fall, it would be down to P&O Ferries to decide whether to put you on the ferry or not. That would not move the border back to the United Kingdom. And I think people in the French election try to make that point, particularly Madame Le Pen. That is not what would happen if it fell, but we're hoping to negotiate a good agreement to follow on from the 2K with the new administration in France.
There's obviously a whole area around Brexit that we've hardly touched on this afternoon, but can I thank you all for attending and leaving the wonderful sunshine behind. It might be raining by the time according to the forecast, but thank you all for your very thoughtful questions, and on your behalf can I thank our panellists for again leaving their homes and their families this weekend to come and speak to you here. Thank you all very much.